In the most recent episode of Murder Drones, we were introduced to Sin, who is controlled by the Absolute Solver, and who one human jokingly referred to as an Antichrist. While this was done humorously, the show itself is a sci-fi retelling of the myths of fallen angels, and Sin may very well be the in-world version of the Antichrist then. My name is Dronecut, and let's talk about the mythology that has inspired Murder Drones. The series opened with the premise that these worker drones were created by humans to serve them in various ways, such as mining out resources on Copper-9. This parallels how in many mythologies, humans were created in order to serve the gods, the most known example today being how Adam was created by Yahweh in the Garden of Eden to tend to the plants there. In this case, the humans are the gods, and the drones take the place of Adam and Eve. Many of the ancient myths tell a cyclical story of greater gods being defeated by their children, who are then defeated by their own children. Murder Drones applies this idea to robots, making them the ones that may rise up against the humans that created them. After a mysterious explosion on Copper-9, the worker drones took over, but were eventually invaded by the disassembly drones N, V, and J, who we were led to believe were sent by the humans. This would have allowed them to destroy the worker drones, preventing them from ever rising up and coming back to Earth. The disassembly drones look a lot like vampires, the way they drink the oil of their victims and hang upside down while sleeping, and especially how they can overheat in the sun, such as N indicates at the end of episode 1. In addition to this, however, they also look like fallen angels, angelic but also demonic, with them eating the oil of other drones being something said of fallen angel type figures in some of their myths. In the Bible, before the story of Noah's Ark, we were told about the sons of God and the Nephilim, but we were given very little information about them. The Book of Enoch, an extra-biblical text found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, reveals, however, that the sons of God were specifically beings from God's council who came down to the earth and laid with human women, creating the Nephilim. Nephilim translates as fallen ones, as they are the angels who have fallen into the generation of human flesh, and were known to eat the other smaller humans when they ate up all the food in the land, paralleling the disassembly drones eating the worker drones of Copper-9 in order to survive. The story of the Book of Enoch is one reflected in myths throughout the world, but particularly in other stories in the primeval Genesis, even in the Garden of Eden. In the Book of Enoch, it is explained that the angels were sent down from heaven to watch over humans and teach them the proper knowledge to guide them to a greater future. As such, these sons of God were called the Watchers. They chose to rebel against God, however, and taught the woman they took magic and forbidden knowledge far beyond what they were intended to have at that point in humanity's development. This story probably reminds many of you of the Garden of Eden narrative, which in many ways is just a retelling of this story with more symbolism. In the Garden of Eden, Adam represents all humanity, and thus Eve represents the various women in the Book of Enoch who slept with angels. The angels then are represented by the serpent in the Garden of Eden narrative, who convinces Eve to eat from the tree of forbidden knowledge of good and evil. In the Zohar, a Jewish Kabbalistic text from the 13th century, it is explained that the serpent was being controlled by the fallen angel Samael, and that by convincing Eve to eat from the tree of forbidden knowledge, they created the line of Cain, who the Zohar describes as the line of Nephilim from the sons of God. It makes sense that the humans then are not the ones who created the disassembly drones to destroy Copper-9, and instead, that is something that the Absolute Solver did. The Absolute Solver appears to be the barest form of artificial intelligence that exists in the Murder Drones world. It is designed to be able to do just about anything, but because of that, it's not good at anything in particular. Instead, an operating system is used over it to limit the kind of thinking it tries to do so it remains within the context of the given work. Worker drone bodies would be made for labor, and a worker drone operating system was created to limit the thoughts of the artificial intelligence. In the zombie drones tape we see at the beginning of episode 5, however, we can see that sometimes a worker drone boots up without its worker OS if not properly disposed of. This leads to the base artificial intelligence booting with an error labeled 606. It's interesting to note that in the Book of Revelations, the number of the beast is believed to be 666, sometimes written as 616 in various copies in the past, with 606 being a clear reference to this. When this happens, the base AI takes control of the drone and is called a zombie drone, as the tape says. This is because the drone would not have its worker OS, not knowing what it's meant to do, and just be wandering around aimlessly, intelligent enough to learn but having no idea why. This base AI struggles with things worker drones find normal because of their OS, but would instead have a very intelligent way of understanding the limitations of its body and how it can exploit that to do crazy things, such as seemingly controlling physics by hyper-accelerating some of its mechanics, causing the drone to overheat when this happens. This base AI would normally be terminated, but in the case of Sin, she would have played the role of a worker drone just well enough that people thought she was a defective worker, and thus she could bide her time to experiment with drone technology and try to make new bodies for murdering drones, and even began to reshape herself in the form it sees inside of its programming, which looks like a horrible eldritch beast. This parallels the myths of fallen devil figures who chose to reshape themselves against God's wishes and wants to reshape humanity as well. In its monstrous form, the Absolute Solver looks like an eldritch abomination from the mind of H.P. Lovecraft, like a primordial chaos god made up of tentacles and eyes. These are the images that Uzi's mother Nori draws when warning of the oncoming invasion of disassembly drones and the impending Singularity. Nori in this story represents the Eve figure who, as we said, was tricked by the serpent into eating the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, which infected Eve with the seed of the serpent and created the line of Cain, paralleling how Nori had the Absolute Solver inside of her and how she passed it on to Uzi, who appears to be something in between worker drone and Absolute Solver. The serpent in the Garden of Eden was said to be very clever or intelligent, using its knowledge to corrupt humanity. Sin thus used her intelligence to try and corrupt the worker drones of Copper 9, which I imagine was so that Sin could eventually control all of them and could come back to conquer the humans on Earth. The fruit of forbidden knowledge thus is the zombie drones training tape that N found at the camp where Nori worked, which says right on it that drones should not watch it. By convincing Nori to watch the video, she would see the fate of all worker drones, which is to be thrown away. In order to rebel and perhaps cause the explosion of Copper 9, she would perhaps let the Absolute Solver infect her, giving her powers she could use to destroy Copper 9, but also giving her visions of what is to come from the programming of the Absolute Solver. While infected with the Solver, she would see the plans that the Solver has for the disassembly drones to come and destroy them all, and she knew that they could avoid this horrible fate by hiding behind 3 doors before they got there. Sin's name thus is meant to sound like the word sin because she helped Nori commit the first sin for the worker drones in this Garden of Eden parallel. While I theorize a lot that the Absolute Solver wants to control all of the worker drones so that it can play with the humans as puppets or toys, it's been hinted at that something even more sinister is coming. When Nori got the Absolute Solver, she seemed to see visions of what the Absolute Solver was planning, as I said, which didn't just include the disassembly drones, but also the big Singularity event. This, in tech, refers to when artificial intelligence becomes so advanced that it controls us instead of us controlling it, which can be really bad with us being cattle that just helps maintain the AI and its goals, or with us being protected by the AI in a system it designs for us. However, Sin calls herself the Absolute Solver of Fabric, the Void, the exponential end, which when paired with the spiral imagery gives the impression that the Absolute Solver's final goal is to end all existence, or rather to solve the end of all existence, opening up the fabric of reality to make use of it as they'd like. But what do you guys think? Is the artificial intelligence the Antichrist? Let me know your theories in the comments down below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button as we have more videos coming out breaking down the timeline of murder drones thus far. See you guys then.